On the night of April 7, 2026, as the clock edged toward midnight in Washington, President Donald Trump posted on Truth Social a message that blended relief with typical bombast. He was suspending the bombings on Iran for 2 weeks. The declared reason was straightforward. The Strait of Hormuz would be reopened to maritime traffic in a complete, immediate, and secure manner. Only hours earlier, the same Trump had warned that an entire civilization would perish if Iran refused to yield. The tone flipped abruptly, almost comically, as though the sheer weight of geography had finally drawn a line under the rhetoric. That strait, a narrow ribbon of water squeezed between the arid mountains of southern Iran and the Muzandam Peninsula in Oman, is far more than a shipping lane. It is the choke point through which roughly 1/5 of the world's oil passes, a place where strategy is counted in nautical miles rather than in tweets. The agreement, brokered by Pakistan, comes after more than a month of escalation that began with coordinated American and Israeli strikes on Iranian nuclear and military sites in February. Tehran answered by closing the strait, firing missiles at regional targets and turning the Persian Gulf into a high-risk zone. Tankers sat idle, barrel prices spiked, global supply chains strained. Now, with the bilateral ceasefire in place, delegations are preparing to meet in Islamabad from April 10th. Both sides claim victory. Trump speaks of military objectives surpassed and a path toward lasting peace in the Middle East. Iran, for its part, celebrates the regime's survival and puts forward a 10-point plan as the basis for negotiations, including a mutual non-aggression pact, the right to peaceful nuclear enrichment, the withdrawal of American troops from the region, war reparations, and the lifting of sanctions. Yet what does this 14-day pause really mean in a region where geography has dictated the rules for centuries? The Strait of Hormuz is only 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest, between the Iranian island of Chatham and the Omani coast. Its shallow waters and confined shipping channels turn any blockade into a potent asymmetric weapon. Iran, even with its conventional fleet battered by the initial attacks, has long understood how to exploit exactly that: naval mines, fast boats packed with missiles, anti-ship missiles perched on the slopes of the Zagros Mountains that tumble down to the shoreline. Closing the strait does not require air superiority. It only needs to sow enough doubt that global insurers refuse coverage and supertankers remain anchored off Bandar Abbas or Fujairah. Julian Borger, senior international correspondent for The Guardian, caught the paradox neatly. The ceasefire hands Trump an immediate political win, with markets rebounding and oil prices falling. Yet it is Iran that enters the Islamabad talks holding stronger cards. Despite severe physical damage, the regime kept its stock of enriched uranium and proved that control of the strait is a lever no amount of bombing can fully neutralize. Peter Ricketts, former UK National Security Advisor, drives the point home. Iran emerges strategically stronger, even if bloodied. The regime survived and showed the world the real power that comes from dominating a vital choke point. Jennifer Kavanagh, Director of Military Analysis at the Defense Priorities think tank, is blunter still. If Trump intended to back down, he chose the worst possible way. He raised the stakes to the maximum, threatened civilizational destruction, and ultimately had to negotiate under global economic pressure. In her view, this is a clear strategic defeat for the United States. American military credibility has been dented and the global perception of U.S. power weakened. It is no exaggeration. The geography of the Persian Gulf, with American bases scattered across Qatar, Bahrain, and the Emirates, has always been vulnerable to Iranian asymmetric strikes. Tehran's ballistic and cruise missiles, even reduced in number after the opening salvos, still threaten installations such as Al-Udeid, the largest U.S. air base in the region. On the Iranian side, the calculation is coldly pragmatic. The Supreme National Security Council confirmed the ceasefire, but attached clear conditions: military coordination for the strait's reopening, release of detained vessels, and the 10-point plan as the negotiating reference. That document includes a non-aggression pact, the right to peaceful enrichment, withdrawal of foreign troops, reparations, and the end of sanctions. This is not surrender. It is proof that the regime, despite military pressure, retained bargaining power. Suzanne Maloney of the Brookings Institution noted in a recent interview that Iran now has breathing room to rebuild military capacity in the medium term, provided the truce holds. Iranian resilience, forged through decades of sanctions and isolation, does not dissolve in 14 days of quiet. Israel finds itself in an awkward spot. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu backed the ceasefire with Iran, but explicitly excluded Lebanon, where operations against Hezbollah continue at full intensity. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif declared that the deal covered everything, including Lebanon, yet Tel Aviv rejected the claim outright. Here geography speaks again. Lebanon, with its rugged southern border and the Bekaa Valley, serves as a launch pad for Hezbollah's rocket arsenal capable of striking deep into Israel. While the world watches the Gulf, the war of attrition on Israel's northern front grinds on, reminding everyone that the Iranian conflict is not isolated. It forms part of a larger arc stretching from the Mediterranean to the Gulf, through Syria and Iraq. Analysts at Chatham House, in an early assessment, underline the implications for America's regional allies. Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, whose exports depend on the strait, breathe easier with the reopening. Yet confidence in American protection has been shaken. What happens if Iran, during the talks, delays full reopening or imposes disguised tolls? Historical memory runs deep. In 1980, during the Iran-Iraq War, the strait already witnessed tanker battles involving mines and raids. Today, with drones and precision missiles, the risk is multiplied. From the American strategic viewpoint, the ceasefire is a necessary tactical retreat. The stated goals had been to degrade Iran's nuclear program, cut missile stocks, and weaken proxy networks. CSIS reports show that the strikes inflicted significant damage on Iranian infrastructure, yet they did not eliminate reconstruction capacity. Iran possesses the human capital and technical knowledge to resume work once the dust settles. Mona Yakubian of CSIS emphasized in recent remarks that the ceasefire opens a window for substantive talks, but warned that without clear long-term objectives the risk of renewed escalation remains high. Here the philosophical skepticism imposed by the history of the Middle East becomes unavoidable. How many times have we watched temporary agreements celebrated as final victories? The 2015 nuclear deal, torn up by Trump in 2018, is the most recent example. Geography does not change. The Elburz Mountains to the north, the Dashti Kavr Desert in the center, and the rocky southern coastline form a natural fortress that favors Iranian defense. The regime, accustomed since the 1979 revolution to surviving external pressure, has turned resilience into doctrine. Closing the strait was a high-risk move, yet an effective one. It exposed the world's dependence on Gulf oil and forced Washington to negotiate before the economic fallout became catastrophic. Trump, in characteristic style, declared that Tuesday had been a great day for world peace and glimpsed a golden era in the Middle East. The irony is hard to miss. The same leader who threatened total obliteration now speaks of a definitive agreement. Reality, however, is more prosaic. The ceasefire is fragile by definition. Any incident in Lebanon, any delay in reopening the strait, or any provocation in international waters could shatter the delicate balance. Iranian armed forces have already announced they will coordinate ship passages, yet keep their fingers on the trigger. The Pentagon, for its part, confirmed that American forces remain ready to resume operations if ordered. Economically, the relief is tangible. Global markets reacted with rising stock exchanges and falling oil prices. Yet that masks deeper structural problems. China, the largest importer of Gulf oil, watched events closely. Beijing wants stability, but also seeks to weaken American influence in the region. Russia, Tehran's ally, benefits from any prolongation of tension that keeps energy prices elevated. Europe, still adjusting supply routes after the war in Ukraine, sees the ceasefire as a chance to diversify, but knows the risk persists. For historians and specialists in international relations, the episode reveals old patterns. American conventional military power is overwhelming, yet the geographic asymmetry and Iranian hybrid warfare level the playing field. The opening strikes damaged facilities at Natanz, Fordow and elsewhere, but the enriched uranium stockpile, estimated at levels sufficient for multiple warheads, was not fully neutralized. Iran kept its nuclear bargaining chip, which it now plays in the Islamabad talks. Trump may claim that almost every point of contention has been resolved, yet the Iranian 10-point plan suggests concessions will be hard-fought. Michael Young of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace highlighted Pakistan's central mediating role, supported by Turkey and Egypt and with subtle Chinese influence. Islamabad, sharing a border with Iran and deep ties to Washington, occupied a unique position. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif not only proposed the framework, but invited the delegations to his capital. This mediation avoids direct embarrassment between adversaries and creates space for back-channel diplomacy. Success, however, hinges on mutual trust, a commodity in short supply after weeks of existential threats. Philosophical skepticism arises inevitably. Modern war in the Middle East is not settled by decisive victories. It is a game of shadows in which geography imposes humility on strategists. The Persian Gulf, with its fortified islands, unpredictable currents and proximity to megacities such as Dubai and Abu Dhabi, turns any conflict into a global threat. Iran, with more than 90 million people and vast territory, cannot be subdued easily. The United States, with extended supply lines and exposed bases, is discovering the limits of power projection. In the coming 2 weeks, the Islamabad conversations will test these dynamics. The American delegation, possibly led by Vice President J.D. Vance, will face Iranian counterparts hardened by recent experience. Central issues remain open: the future of the nuclear program, the status of sanctions, the foreign military presence in the Gulf, support for regional proxies. The Iranian 10-point plan serves as a draft, but Trump insists many points were already covered in his own 15-point proposal. The divergence in narratives already signals the minefield ahead. From the military standpoint, the Pentagon remains cautious. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs General Dan Kane stated that American forces are prepared to resume operations if directed. That is not empty rhetoric. Aircraft carriers in the Gulf, air squadrons at regional bases, and nuclear submarines guarantee rapid response. Yet the political and economic cost of resumption would be steep. American public opinion, weary of prolonged interventions, may not tolerate fresh escalation without a clear justification. For the interested lay reader, the picture may seem bewildering: apocalyptic threats followed by sudden agreement. In truth, it reflects the nature of contemporary strategy. The geography of the Middle East, with its deserts, mountains, and narrow sea lanes, has always favored the clever defender over the conventional attacker. Iran exploited that masterfully. It closed the strait, absorbed the blows, and forced negotiation. The United States, despite technological superiority, learned that air and naval power have limits when the adversary controls the ground and the clock. Israel, meanwhile, continues its campaign in Lebanon, where Hezbollah poses the more immediate existential threat. The exclusion of Lebanon from the ceasefire creates a dangerous anomaly. If Hezbollah intensifies attacks, Iran may feel compelled to respond indirectly, testing the limits of the deal. Netanyahu rejected the broad Pakistani interpretation, insisting the truce applies only to the Iranian front. That fragmentation underscores the arrangement's fragility. Economically, the reopening of the strait eases pressure on global economies. Tankers that had been queued off Fujairah or in the Arabian Sea can now sail. Yet the memory of the 38-day closure will linger. Insurers will raise premiums, alternative routes will gain appeal, and investment in renewable energy may accelerate. The lesson is clear: excessive dependence on a single geographic choke point exposes systemic vulnerabilities. On the broader plane of international relations, the ceasefire illustrates current multipolarity. Neither Washington nor Tehran controls the region's fate alone. China, with Belt and Road investments running through Pakistan and Iran, has a direct stake. Russia, entangled in its own war in Ukraine, sees the Middle East as a useful distraction for the West. Gulf states, balancing American alliances with economic pragmatism, watch warily. Philosophical skepticism, therefore, is not cheap pessimism. It is the recognition that power, however overwhelming it appears, meets resistance in geography, history, and human will. Iran was not defeated. It survived and now bargains from a relatively stronger position. The United States did not secure a decisive victory. It stepped back to avoid greater costs. The 2-week pause is pragmatic, necessary to prevent global economic collapse, yet it carries the seeds of renewed escalation. In the streets of Tehran, modest celebrations marked the announcement. In Washington, the tone was one of contained triumph. In Tel Aviv, vigilance was redoubled. The real test will come in the negotiating rooms of Islamabad, where diplomats will try to turn a temporary truce into something more durable. The geography of the Gulf, implacable, will remind all involved that the sea forgives no illusions of grandeur. What follows depends on a strategic humility that is rare in polarized times. If the agreement evolves into a broader pact, including mutual security guarantees and regional normalization, it could mark a turning point. If it fails, as so many before it have failed, it will reinforce the cycle of violence that has defined the Middle East for decades. For now, the strait reopens, tankers sail, and the world breathes easier. But genuine peace demands more than 14 days of silence in the guns. It demands a deep understanding of the physical and historical contours that shape the conflict. In the final analysis, the episode exposes the limits of a maximalist approach. Trump raised the rhetoric, threatened the unthinkable, and retreated when reality presented the bill. Iran resisted, adapted, and kept its essential levers. Analysts such as Borger, Ricketts, and Kavanagh captured the essence. What looks like a tactical victory may conceal a high strategic cost. The geography of the Strait of Hormuz, with its turquoise waters and arid mountains in the background, stands as a silent reminder. Power flows along maritime routes, and whoever controls them, even temporarily, sets the pace of history. The coming weeks will show whether this pause was the beginning of something new or merely an inevitable postponement. Future historians will look back on April 7th, 2026 not as a moment of unilateral glory, but as a classic illustration of how strategy bends before geography and human resilience. The Gulf waits, patient, for the next chapter.